All right, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Missouri Western State University Board of Governors Finance Committee meeting. We do have a quorum present, and I welcome everyone that we have on Zoom. With our auditors will be participating via Zoom, along with Lisa Norton and Bob Walleman, who we're excited to have recently, this past week, been appointed to our Board of Governors, and we'll have their confirmation coming up shortly, and excited to have them on the board in the expertise and counsel that they will bring to this. We welcome to both of you. So glad to have you participating. Without any further ado, I'll just turn this over to Vice President and CFO Daryl Morrison to take the meeting from here.
Okay. Thank you, Governor Teeman. Welcome everyone to this meeting. I would begin by, I'm going to hand the meeting off as well to our audit partners from BKD in Kansas City. We have with us Rachel Dwiggins and Dustin Haywood. I'm sorry, Dustin, from BKD, and they have a presentation. And the way this will transpire is each of you should have gotten a draft copy of our audit report and should have reviewed it and had an opportunity to look through it. Not only that, but there's additional information that was provided to you as summary type information from BKD. I believe they have a presentation for us this afternoon that they will be giving, and then we'll open it up to questions and comments toward the end. And they can state if they want to run through all the slides at one time, or if they'd rather take questions as they arise, or how they want to do this. So Dustin and Rachel, thank you for being with us this afternoon, and the floor is yours.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you for allowing us this opportunity to present the results of the audit. I think we can all agree that 2020 has been a challenging year in more ways than one. And, we even with respect to the audit, we learned how to do the audit remotely. And here we are. While we would much rather, be there with you in person, we're presenting the results here virtually as well. So again, we, just thank you for the opportunity to work with you. And I'm going to actually turn it over to Dustin, who's going to go through the presentation. Are you going to share your screen, Dustin? Or
I am. I'm going to bring this up right now. Board presentation. Okay. Well, thank you, Rachel. First of all, just want to make sure everybody can hear me okay, and that you can see the screen presented there. Should be the BKD National Higher Education Group.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, well, before I jump into this presentation, I did want to acknowledge a couple things. As Rachel mentioned, we all know that 2020 has been an extremely difficult and challenging year for a variety of reasons here, but a couple things that I wanted to touch on from a very high level standpoint before we start getting into any details. First off, I did want to mention that management has been fully cooperative and completely transparent throughout the entire audit process. So we very much appreciate management during this engagement. The audit reports and the report to the Board of Governors and Audit Committee is still in draft form. I did want to mention that we are done with our audit procedures, so we are essentially ready to finalize and release upon the approval of the committee here today. As Rachel mentioned, we did do a entirely remote audit this year. So to commend management for the efforts taken to really navigate this virtual audit process. And so there were times when we had virtual meetings such as this, Zoom or Teams, to conduct business. A lot of email traffic, but management did a great job working through this new virtual environment, if you will. I will touch on the opinions a little bit more, but we will be issuing an unmodified or a clean audit opinion on the financial statements for 2020. Very happy to report, as you'll see in this presentation, that we do not have any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies that we are communicating in writing. So in other words, a very clean audit. And lastly, again, I will touch on this in the slides, but if you did get a chance to look through the audit draft, you'll notice that the single audit is not included. And so we are actually still awaiting guidance from the Department of Education as to what testing requirements there are for the CARES Act higher education relief funds. So as it stands right now, that is still open and awaiting guidance. So those were a couple high level items that I wanted to touch on real quick. I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. If you do have any questions, please feel free to speak up, interrupt me. I'm happy to answer any questions as we move through. If you want to hold your questions to the end, we will have plenty of time at the end to go through questions as well. Start here. Okay. So the summary for today, we'll go through a general discussion of the audit and the results, an overview of the financial statements, and we will lastly cover some required communications. I've included some benchmarking analysis and a few other matters to discuss here today. So we'll begin with a summary of our audit approach and results. And I do have a couple slides here on the next two pages here to get into a little bit more details on this. The areas of audit emphasis, these are not all of the high risk areas in the financial statements. There are a couple more areas that you will see on the next page, but these are what has been determined the significant risk areas and what is communicated to the committee at the beginning of the audit process. So a little bit of detail information on that. We do take a risk-based audit approach, focusing on the unique characteristics of the university's operating environment. There are a few areas that we perform detailed procedures on, as I just mentioned, because of the high-risk areas, and those are going to include any areas where management can override controls, accounts receivable and revenue recognition. And really, though, these first two are inherent risks to any and every financial statement audit, regardless of the industry. The next four, long-term debt, pension liabilities, any unusual transactions, and the significant estimates are the remaining areas where we focus the majority of our time during the audit process. There are substantive analytic procedures really done across the university in both the balance sheet accounts or the statement of net position accounts and the statement of changes accounts. We also incorporate an element of unpredictability every year so that management doesn't get too familiar with our procedures. And so those are really, it really depends on facts and circumstances that occurred with the university each year. So we are looking for new areas of emphasis or areas of unusually high or low performance in the current year. Regarding the opinions, a couple things to point out here. So the management's introduction, the management's discussion and analysis, and the information required for bonds is all included in the audit report. However, that is all unaudited information. The management's discussion and analysis is a required part of the financial statements. The statements of the Missouri Western State University Foundation are audited by other auditors, and so we do not provide an opinion on the foundation statements. Lastly, we do provide, obviously, our opinion on the financial statements of the university. And as I previously mentioned, very happy to report that we are issuing an unmodified or clean audit opinion on the financial statements for fiscal year 2020. Moving on, getting into the statements of net position. As you look through the assets and deferred outflows, not a big swing on this side of things. Really, the only thing is the decrease in deferred outflows, which is really related to the proportionate share of the collective outflows related to Mosers. As you scroll down, the two numbers that really stick out to me is the pension liability, another $4 million increase on the pension liability this year, as well as the decrease in the net position. I have a couple slides later on here that I'll get into a little bit more details on that, but those were the big swings this year that I wanted to point out in regards to the statements of net position. Looking at the statements of revenues, expenses, and changes in that position, a few numbers again here that stick right out. First of all, I'll say obviously COVID did have a significant impact on the university, as well as the declaration of financial emergency made by management. And there were a lot of impacts, trickle-down impacts that related to that. But a few notable swings here that jump off the page at you, I feel like, are the state appropriations is a decrease of just shy of 2 million, about 1.9 million, or 9% decrease. The next thing is the government grants and contracts line item there. You'll notice a roughly a $3.5 million increase, or just shy of 35%. And $3 million of that is directly related to the CARES Act higher education relief funds. Contributions, about a $3.5 million increase, a really significant increase this year. There were some one-time pass-through expenditures that the foundation provided support to the university this year. Those were the big ticket items on the revenue side. As far as the expenses, really the only thing that jumps out at you are the fringe benefits, was just shy of a $2 million or 11% increase there as well. Actually, a $2.3 million increase in the pension expense is what drove that increase as well. Those were the highlights as far as the statement of changes. Okay, so this next area gets into our required communications, some other matters, and future accounting pronouncements that are out there. So the first thing to talk about are the significant estimates. Significant estimates are inherently included in all financial statements. A few of the more significant areas include the allowance for any uncollectible receivables, the depreciable lives assigned for property and equipment, the net pension liability, the OPEB liability, and the compensated absences as well. We did not have or did not note any sort of unusual accounting policies or methods applied by the university. We did not have any disagreements with management. We did have one past adjustment this year that related to some bad debt expense. And really what that was, when we dug into it, was there was an entry that got recorded backwards this year. And so that was one adjustment that came up. We did not have any past adjustments, so nothing that was proposed by the auditors that management ultimately passed on. Some of the significant issues discussed with management this year during the audit process includes the declaration of state of financial emergency that was made. the CARES Act and obviously the related higher education emergency relief fund grants, the deferral of GASB 84 and 87 standards, and lastly, the delays in the issuance of the compliance supplement. The compliance supplement, is what governs the single audit testing requirements for our audit procedures. Other matters, the only comment that I included in that report to the Board of Governors was a comment on long-term financial sustainability. I don't think this is any surprise here, but I definitely think this is something that management and governance needs to continue to make a focus on. I think there were a lot of strides taken in the right direction this year in regards to long-term financial sustainability with the university, starting with the declaration of financial emergency and the related impacts from that. I don't think it's any secret that the higher ed industry is facing a number of issues right now, including the declining number of college students, the concerns on affordability, any disruptions out there, like a COVID disruption, for example. And as competition intensifies trying to meet those market demands, there's a lot of pressure on institutions to really look at long-term financial sustainability. So just something that we felt was appropriate to include this year, that both management and governance to continue to make this a high priority and focus for the university. Lastly, we did have a couple, as I mentioned, the deferrals in GASB 84 and 87. But what that means is that GASB 84 is now going to be required to implement for fiscal year 21. And GASB 87 will be required to implement in fiscal year 22. These deferrals were very much welcomed relief during the middle of this COVID pandemic. So the industry as a whole was very pleased to get this deferral. Continuing on here, I did want to provide a single audit update. So as I mentioned, the compliance supplement governs those testing procedures. And so as part of the audit, there are various elements of compliance with federal regulations that we do need to test. There were two major programs this year that the university administered, and the first is the Student Financial Aid, or the SFA cluster, and the second is the CARES Act Higher Education Relief Funds grants. So as you can see here, the SFA elements include different forms of eligibility testing, amounts awarded, any financial aid returned, a lot of reporting of the aid dispersed, and education eligibility requirements as an example. We have completed the financial aid portion of our single audit testing, and I can say that we currently do not have any reportable findings. However, the compliance supplement is still outstanding. And that is why there is still delays on, we have not tested the second major program, the CARES Act funding, because of the delays in that guidance. I will say that it was originally scheduled it was originally scheduled by the end of October, then they pushed to the beginning right before Thanksgiving. And now here we are, a week in front of Christmas, and we still have not received the guidance. So we are hoping to get an extension on the deadline for this testing as well, because it's going to leave a lot of institutions scrambling to get this testing done right now with the March 31st deadline. As we know more or see any guidance released, we will immediately let management know that has been issued and develop a plan to wrap up this testing. Okay. Continuing on here, these next 3 slides are some benchmarking analysis that I put together this year. The blue bars on the next 3 slides represent the university. The red bars represent peer institutions. And I selected all of the public institutions in the state of Missouri. So Northwest, Central, Southeast, Truman, everyone except I did exclude the top and bottom outliers from this analysis. So think of like Mizzou, I did exclude from this analysis. This first graph shows the net position as a % of total assets and deferred outflows. And so as you can see, the university has had a steady, significant decline in the net position balance over the previous 5 years. There is a similar trend from the peer institutions. However, as you can see, nowhere nearly quite as drastic as the declines that you've seen here at the university. So that goes back to the long-term financial sustainability comments where the net position needs to be a focus. And really the biggest hit and impact here has been the pension obligation. But I do want to emphasize that it is an obligation of the university. So those non-cash expenditures, if you will, do need to be taken into account when really looking at the university as a whole. The second slide here shows salary and benefits as a % of total operating expenses. And again, here you can see that the university has remained significantly higher than its peer institutions across the state. The one comment that I wanted to make here is, so for example, the average delta here over the years is roughly 5%. That 5% of the total operating expenses is equivalent to approximately $4 million that would fall straight to the bottom line here if you were more in line with the peer institutions across the state. The last benchmarking slide that I prepared here is a operating revenues as a % of total operating expenses. This slide, I think it does show that Missouri, the university is more in line with the peer institutions across the state. However, I did want to point out kind of the threshold that I look at is this 50% mark. And you can see for the previous 5 years across the peer institutions, they have stayed above that 50% mark for operating revenues compared to expenses. Whereas the university has not quite been able to ever cross that 50% threshold. So that is the presentation that I wanted to cover. As I mentioned, plenty of time for questions here, so I'm happy to open this up for questions and answer anything that that you guys.
Dustin, could you, this is Lee Tiemann. Could you just expand a little more when you said at the beginning that this is a clean audit just for us lay people, as well as those that may be listening in? Could you just kind of expand what that means, that this is a clean audit, and what the other alternatives would be other than a clean audit?
Yes, absolutely, and great question. So there are a couple different things that I'll touch on here on really what that means. So when I say a clean audit, that is an unmodified opinion. The alternative to that would be a qualified opinion, which would mean that there was something within the financial statements that was not accounted for or presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles here in the United States. So if there was any sort of accounting that did not comply with GAAP, then that would result in a qualified opinion. So that's the first piece that I like to point out when I say clean, unmodified, or clean opinion. The second piece when I refer to a clean audit is back up here in this required communications section. Before this other matters comment, there would be a section included in that report to the Board of Governors over internal control over financial reporting. If there were any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies or even deficiencies that we identified during the audit process, we are required to communicate those to governance in that letter. And so, as I mentioned earlier, there was nothing that we included in that letter. There were no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies, and no deficiencies that we identified to include in writing to communicate to governance here. So two things when I think about a clean audit: the opinion, an unmodified opinion versus a qualified opinion, and no written material weaknesses or significant deficiencies identified during the audit process. Does that answer your question?
Oh, that certainly helps. And I probably have a few more questions along those lines, because expounding upon the concept that this is an unusual times, and the fact that we are doing this virtual, and normally we would be open to the public to come and watch our proceedings. Since we don't allow the public in for this because of health concerns, it's available for public access to be watched virtual. So I may back up and lay a few more foundation blocks just for those that are interested, that are listening or watching this. The audit that you focused on, that was for our fiscal year 2020, which ended June 30th, correct?
Correct.
And while we established our state of financial emergency prior to then, and established even before the state of financial emergency a number of cost-cutting measures, significant ones such as the reduction in faculty, things of that nature, when we did the academic review and reduced programs and the costs associated with that. None of those cost savings would even show up on this yet, would they?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Specifically the faculty reduction, because a lot of that is, how do I say this, kind of a step down approach to where there were either tenured faculty or the exit would not be until the end of this fiscal year. And so you're absolutely right. A lot of that is not going to show up in this fiscal year 2020 financials, but you will see the results of that in fiscal year 21.
Right. And I'm talking about that in somewhat sterile terms because, we have gone through the personal pains of that, of the people involved that we, livelihoods were affected, students affected, some really, difficult things that we wrestled with. But those have been accomplished, but the actual on the paper financial results, it is anticipated that will show up even more significantly next year at this time, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, and Daryl, I don't know if you want to touch on this, but in one of our last conversations, the opportunity, or I guess there was a decline in some additional cash flow from the foundation support because of the cash position of the university here in December. So there wasn't a need for that additional support from the foundation. And
I'm sorry, that is true. We did that because our cash position has increased. We've moved right. We discussed this at our previous board meeting, that particular item.
Right, and we're being redundant, but for those that may not have been privy to that discussion, previously the Missouri Western Foundation had agreed to distribute additional funds to us, and as a university, we declined those
Right.
in December, correct?
That is correct. That is correct, because our cash position had improved to a level that we're managing and doing well with that.
Yeah.
I would also just, if I might, and while the auditors are on the line as well, one of the issues, if you look at our net position, that's certainly a concern of mine, and we've talked about it. I've talked with you as a board numerous times about our net position and things. One of the interesting things, if you look though at the bottom line, while our net position is still going in the wrong direction, even in the midst of a pandemic, you can see that our numbers did not decrease as dramatically as they had. And this takes into account $2 million loss in state appropriation, along with over $1 million loss in auxiliary enterprise revenue, particularly in our student housing. So in the midst of this, it's bad. Financially, we're still in a state of financial emergency, Governor Teeman. However, you're going to see this continually turn, and this is the shifting we're hopeful of the tide, right? With those numbers there, by them not being as dramatic as they have been in the past.
Right, and some of the things that were talked about, like the increase in our pension liability, those were part of, or was certainly a significant item when we were discussing our financial situation a year ago.
Yes.
With that, as you had addressed what the future was going to be holding
Right.
for us on that, based upon the state reducing contributions to that.
That's correct. And our pension, effective here in just a few days, January 1, our pension contribution goes up for us, but this is post-employment and a lot of those things which are on down the line. And those are the things that we've got to prepare for and begin to cover that liability and build up that reserve for those things.
Dustin, another question I'd had, I appreciate the comparisons you had to our peer institutions. I guess depends on how we define of who our peers are. You said that Mizzou is not included in that. Does that mean the entire University of Missouri system is not included, or is that just Mizzou?
No, so I did include UMKC.
Okay.
I just excluded Columbia.
Okay, and so Missouri State would be included in that also?
Correct.
Okay, and you already said SEMO was, so where we are lower in comparison to that group, wouldn't that also be a fair statement if you would take us out and replace us with another, how I might define some of our, a smaller peer group within the MIAA or the Division II schools? If you would take us out and have Northwest or Missouri Southern, maybe you know, maybe you don't, but wouldn't that graph look about the same? You just replaced us with one of those schools?
There may be one or two, but the peer graph here, these are the average of all of those schools. So there may be one or two that drags that down, but I don't believe that it would be interchangeable with the university in say at Northwest or UCM or anything like that.
And clearly that's something we are focusing on and trying to address. I'm just trying to, within a broader spectrum, see where we're at on that. So
Sure. Yeah, and that's why I tried to exclude Columbia and the low end. It's slipping my mind right now, but I tried to exclude the top and bottom outliers to get really everybody in that middle position here for the public institutions in the state of Missouri.
I have a question, if I might.
Sure.
The pension funding, do we have any of that funded, or is that all liability?
That is all liability.
All right.
Yeah, and that's at the state level. And so here, I'm trying to find the slide here. So this liability here is the university's proportionate share of Mosher's pension liability.
And none of it's funded.
You can see that's what's pushing, I mean, that's the big factor that's pushing that unrestricted net position into a deficit
Okay.
position.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
May I ask a question? This is Lisa Norton.
Of course.
Same topic. So ultimately, does the state have the obligation to pay that? So if the university can't, the state does, or the pensionees are just out of luck?
So that's a long-standing legal question. When this GASB standard went into effect, there was a lot of pushback that, well, why are the individual institutions, having to record this liability? And at the end of the day, you're all recording it. What would ultimately happen? I can't say. I mean, that's really more of a legal issue. But as it stands now, every institution that participates in Mosher's has to record their actuarially determined piece of that liability.
And do we today send cash to Mosher's for people as they retire, or how does that work?
You have a set amount that you are required to fund it, a set percentage that's determined each year. And that is an actual cash outflow.
Okay.
If I might interject just for a second on this, it's kind of a pay-as-you-go in some ways, in that the rates are what they are, and we pay this in order to fund the overall pension liability. And Dustin, Rachel, jump in if I'm misrepresenting this in any way, but the pension liability would be our portion of it should everybody seek retirement effective immediately.
Correct.
Okay, that's what it would take to do that, but because it's an overall liability, it's a rolling thing. Some drop off, some go on, and things like that. But if everybody took retirement today, our obligation, according to the GASB standards, would be the 63.8.
That is correct.
Does it show somewhere? I'm sure it does. I tried to read every page of this, but there's a lot where the annual amount hits the financials.
There is, in here, I just had that pulled up here. It's in footnote 5, I believe, is the pension. And there is on page 49,
Okay.
there's a section for pension expense. And so that shows what actually hits the financials for expense in the fiscal years. And so you can see pension for 2020 was about $12.8 million of expense. And for 2019 was about $10.5 million of expense. So about a $2.3 million jump right there, just related to pension.
And there's a lot of narrative in that footnote too, explaining the program and what those required contribution percentages are. And that percentage increased from 20.21 in fiscal year 19 to 21.77 in fiscal year 20. So, and you have no say in that. I mean, that's determined by the plan and basicthere dictated to you.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to point out on the pension, there was a bigger hit this year. There were changes in the discount rate and the rate of return that both negatively impacted the university's position.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's Dustin, just maybe following up a little bit more with that, or you, Rachel, as well. We're certainly mindful of the significant liability on the books that we're required to carry because of the pensions, but the way that we have it booked is according to a gap and the way that all of the I mean, it's the way all higher education books this, right? I mean, we're not doing anything different than anybody else. It's what we're required to do, correct?
Correct. This is consistent across all public institutions here in Missouri.
Have any other questions from the board? Comments? Concerns? Governor Land.
I'm going to stop sharing here. I did have one other thing that I was going to pull up here and let the board know that, and management as well, is that we did just recently release our 2021 annual higher education outlook. So there's some great information in there. I think we're seeing some of the major trends in higher ed right now relating to what I will call self-reflection, really looking at that long-term sustainability, and kind of looking in the mirror on what changes need to be made. We're seeing a lot of partnerships and more agreements between institutions. So say a more partnerships between a JUCO offering classes and then how that would feed right into a longer term 4-year institution. We are seeing expanding presence in online. Obviously, COVID having a big impact there as well. And lastly, the fourth piece is really looking at innovation within higher ed. And so that can be related to course delivery or content, student engagement, looking for new revenue streams, really just looking at different ways to be innovative within the higher ed industry. And this is a really great read, and I think something that I'd be happy to forward on to Daryl, and he can pass along to the committee if anybody's interested in this as well.
That would be great, Dustin, and I'll forward on to our board.
Of course. That was the only other thing that I had as far as this presentation. So
I think, Dustin, I think Governor Landis has one question.
sure.
It's a comment. And so Bob and Lisa, welcome. You're not officially here yet, but you're going to be there real quick. And both of you are going to serve on the committee that I'm the chairman of, which is the Finance Operation Personnel Committee. And once you get in here, it's a real education to see how education functions. You get mandated more things. We that come from a private business that go and deal with things, this is a whole different environment. So I look forward to our first official committee meeting because, and the good news is we've got Brother Daryl here who is going to be a very key part of that. And so once again, thank you for getting here. I'll put it that way. You're not quite there yet, but all due respect, Jeff City has trouble doing some things every now and then.
Okay.
That's my comment, Mr. Chairman.
Very good.
I'll do my best. I'm pretty sure I'm never going to be official, and I
Well, join the club.
don't really know what to do about it, so I just keep doing the best I can.
That's what we're going to do.
Governor Teeman, if I might, I'd just like to say thank you to Rachel and Dustin for their time today. I know Rachel has another appointment shortly. I also would like to echo some of their things. We did experience some challenges trying to do this audit completely virtually. And Letha Nold, our Director of Accounting, Associate Controller, worked countless hours. I know I had numerous of my colleagues here saying they were by the campus on the weekends and nights and late and things, doing things, trying to work on this. So I'd just like to give her a shout out and that whole team. They've done some exceptional work to make this, and I appreciate working with BKD and the support and the guidance and the things that they provide us. So with that, thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Echo that, Daryl, and very appreciative of that. And we have been provided about an 80-page audit report, a draft to review prior to this meeting, and another 10 or 12-page kind of executive summary report that BKD provided to us, that with the multiple conversations I had with members of our board, that has been very helpful. We have, it's information that we appreciate and take very seriously with our fiduciary obligations to the university, to the students, to the stakeholders here, to the taxpayers. And so this is an integral part. There are other things we have to do as part of our due diligence, but BKD is our auditor's report. We appreciate the thoroughness of that, the give and take, the feedback that you're providing us to continue to keep improving. We like when we receive positive marks, but we also very much need to hear and welcome the areas that we can improve in as well. And so thank you for your efforts on that and helping us continue to make this a strong and healthy university. So thank you. And once again, I don't want to cut anybody short. Are there any other questions, comments on the draft reports before we give I guess the okay for that to become a final report? Anything else? I'm kind of going on the fly with that. Do we need a motion then to approve this, to allow them to turn it into a final? Okay. We'll move.
Lee, can I break in just a second?
Sure, go ahead, Bob.
Thank you. The amount of controversy that preceded this audit with regards to what the board was acknowledging as acceptable, I don't want us to get into that challenge with this audit. And being so new here, I'm going to rely on those around the table that have been there for a while about their comfort level compared to what they've experienced previously with audits, because there was some advocacy that we had a clean audit, but yet there was a cash challenge that went unnoticed, that kind of thing. And maybe I'm being too simplistic here, but I'd hate to put a stamp on this just because I guess I'm just a little hesitant here without a little more affirmation from the board members that were in the previous conversation for last year.
Okay.
Is that fair? Maybe it's not fair. I don't know, but I don't know how Lisa feels, but I don't want to see us having a controversy that we didn't do our job as board members. And maybe Daryl, you can attest to this. And
Governor Woolman, I certainly appreciate your comments and your concern and your thought. Every audit cycle stands on its own 2 feet, so to speak. I think one of the things, beginning with my tenure here, and particularly with President Wilson, is that the transparency that we have provided throughout this process and the explanation that I've tried to provide at every single Board of Governors meeting was that this did not come as a surprise, I don't believe, to anyone, exactly where we're at, exactly where the numbers landed. and things like that. I think that may have been part of the issues. I was not here, so I can't say this concretely, but it would be my understanding that there had not been always the detail given throughout the fiscal year, so that when the audit report came, there were some misconceptions, misunderstandings, not knowing what was expected at that time. So that's just my kind of 2 cents. I know that the financial information that is presented in this report was presented and discussed at our previous Board of Governors meeting in draft form way before this, and we took questions. I'm not sure if you were, watching us at that time, Governor Woolman, but that's really where I'm at with this. The final thing is the audit report is a third party has evaluated our financial statements. They've made a recommendation, and now there are governing things that we have to file the report for with the federal government and with bonding agencies and on down the line. And so it's really kind of imperative that due to the late nature of the year that it is, that we get this approved so we can move forward. But I'll be happy to answer any questions about anything.
Darryl, I was just looking for some reassurance like you've given. And having had the opportunity to sit on the foundation board and to listen to a lot of conversations over the past year, I am fully comfortable with what you just acknowledged and suggested, and I have no reason to encourage us not to proceed forward with this. So
no,
just ask and answer, and I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you. I would also say in Governor Landis, Governor Norton, yourself serving on the upcoming Finance Committee for the next year, there'll be a lot of more discussion, and hope to do some training on higher ed financial statements with the group for a understanding and helpful approach to this, and some open dialogue to answer some of your questions. Okay.
Thank you very much.
And Governor Wallman, I would probably piggyback on that a bit. I very much welcome your question. I mean, that's what we are supposed to do, is ask questions. We are an oversight board. There are no silly questions. Certainly, as we get new members on, we want that fresh perspective to ask questions. Maybe it's things that can help re-educate some of us that have been on for a bit longer, or maybe it's things, a completely new perspective that we just needed to have. So I very much welcome and appreciate that. I would put out there, and why I had said earlier that our audit is just one of the pieces in our oversight responsibility. We have had clean audits in the past when we have still had financial issues. The audit is not looking at every possible aspect that we would as an oversight board. When they're examining our financial statements, whether they are correct, done appropriately, whether receipts match up to deposits, things of that nature. They are not evaluating whether we offered too many programs here, whether we spent too much on personnel, faculty, things like that. So those were, it's a piece that fits in, to our larger picture that we are working on. I would also say that because it's been less than a year that we declared our financial emergency, that has added new things that auditors are looking at, and maybe just a little bit more scrutiny with some of those things. Last year at this time, we were trying to trim budgets and get a hold of things, but we had not declared any type of financial distress or emergency. So that's kind of a new part to that puzzle too. And so that's where this is an outside entity that is looking at our books, but as far as our internal management decision-making, that's going to fall on us and not the outsiders with that. But it is a key component in knowing that what we have put together, what our management is doing and providing to us does or is appropriate and meets the necessary standards for that.
May I ask a question?
Sure, Governor Norton.
Who did the audit last year? Same company, BKD?
Yes.
Yes.
And has that always been the case for a long time, or what's the tenure look like?
We are currently under a 5-year contract. So fiscal year 21, I believe, is the last year of our current contract.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mhm.
Been a good discussion, and I certainly want to give everyone as much opportunity as they want. If there are any other questions, comments, concerns, as I know everyone takes this very seriously and a lot of a really good dialogue here. I appreciate that.
I might jump in and just make one more comment and really just following this train of thought and diving back to your original question of what it means to have a clean audit. And Governor Woolman, to your point here, we are auditing the numbers. We are not looking at evaluating management's decisions on, are they offering the right programs? Are they offering too many programs? Are we paying somebody too much? We are auditing what they paid. So the numbers, that is what we are providing our opinion on. And so when I say a clean audit, it doesn't mean that the university is in picture perfect shape and has no financial worries or nothing to worry about. It's that the numbers presented in this report, we believe, are reasonably accurate or materially accurate for any users to use these financial statements.
Right. This was an important piece to answer some of the questions that were floating around in the public, or the some of the whispering campaign of, was there any, I'll use my non-technical accounting term here, funny business going on? And this disproves that. There's no funny business going on. It was just economic realities that we had to deal with. This gives us that clean bill of health as to, when we say there's a deposit, the deposit happened. When we said we paid this much for this program or for this person, that is accurate. There is no, buried stipends or things like that in there. That's the assurance we could give to the public on that. And once again, I'm being redundant, but it's an important block in what we're doing, but it's not the only block. We still do other ones. This is what we have requested that our auditors do, and they have provided us what we've asked for in that regard. But we still have a lot of work. So if there are no other questions, do I have a motion to approve the audit report for fiscal year 2019 to 2020 as has been presented?
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second? Second. I have a second. Any other discussion on this topic? Hearing none, I will now call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion to approve the audit report for fiscal year 2019-2020 as presented, say aye.
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 Those opposed, say nay. The audit report for fiscal year 2019 to 2020 as presented is hereby approved. Is there any other business? If there is none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, Dustin, Rachel, Bob, and Lisa for participating via Zoom, and anyone else who has had the interest to watch this. I very much appreciate that. Thank you, everyone.